I was standing in a notary's office in downtown Ottawa, pen in my hand, when my sister-in-law walked through the door and said 4 words that stopped everything. "Don't sign that yet." I almost didn't listen. I was 31 years old, 7 months pregnant with my first child, and I had been awake since 4 in the morning. My feet were swollen. My back had been hurting for 3 days straight, and the documents in front of me, the ones transferring my name off the joint title of the house my husband and I had bought together 2 years earlier, felt like the last thing standing between me and the end of something I hadn't even seen coming. My name is Cecily, and I need to tell you what happened in that office because I'm still not sure people would believe me if I didn't explain it from the beginning. My husband and I had been together for 6 years before everything fell apart. We met in graduate school at Carleton University. He was studying urban planning. I was finishing my master's in social work. We were the kind of couple that other people called solid. His name was, I'll just call him my husband, because honestly, that's still how I think of him, even now. We got married in a small ceremony outside of Kingston on a Thursday in September. Just family and close friends, and for the first 4 years of our marriage, I genuinely thought we had figured something out that a lot of people hadn't. Then we bought the house. It was a semi-detached in Canada, nothing fancy, but it was ours. We stretched our budget to make it work. My husband's parents helped with part of the down payment. His father contributed $40,000, which was significant, and we were grateful. His mother had always been involved in our finances in small ways. She co-signed on an early car loan we'd taken out before we were married, and she had a habit of offering advice about money that nobody had asked for. But she was family, and I had learned to smile and let it pass. The problem started about 8 months before I found myself standing in that notary's office. My husband started working longer hours. He stopped talking about the baby the way he used to. Excited, full of plans, texting me nursery ideas at 10 at night. That stopped. He became quieter, more distracted. When I asked what was wrong, he told me work was stressful. When I asked again, he said he was tired. When I asked a third time, he sat down across from me at the kitchen table and said, "Cecily, I think we need to talk about the house." I remember the cold feeling that moved through me right then, not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. Like he'd rehearsed it. He told me that there were some financial complications and that he needed to remove my name from the title temporarily. He used that word, temporarily, and repeated it twice. He said his mother had flagged some concerns to their family accountant and that the cleanest solution was to simplify the ownership structure for a while. He said it was nothing serious. He said it wouldn't affect me. I asked him what complications. He said he couldn't go into detail yet. I asked him why his mother was involved in our house. He said she was just trying to help. I asked him if this was related to the money his father had contributed. His jaw tightened, and he said, "Can you just trust me on this? I want to be honest with you." Part of me wanted to. We'd been together for 6 years. We had a baby coming in less than 2 months. I was exhausted and scared, and the last thing I wanted was a fight. So I told him I'd think about it. What I didn't tell him was that I called my sister-in-law that same night. She and my husband had never been especially close. There was a 10-year gap between them, and she'd spent most of her 20s living in Vancouver. But she and I had built something real over the years. We texted regularly. We'd done a road trip together the summer before I got pregnant. She was the kind of person who said exactly what she thought, which sometimes irritated her brother, but which I had always appreciated. When I told her what my husband had asked me to do, there was a long silence on the other end of the phone. "Cecily," she said finally. "Do not sign anything." I asked her why. She said she needed a few days. I didn't push her. I didn't know then what she was trying to confirm. I just told my husband I needed more time to think, and he seemed frustrated but didn't press me. He said the appointment with the notary was already booked for the following Thursday and asked if I could be ready by then. I said I'd try. In the days between that conversation and the Thursday appointment, I found myself going through every piece of paper I could find in the house. Bank statements, mortgage documents, the original purchase agreement, the records of the down payment contribution. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. I just knew something felt wrong in a way I couldn't name yet. On Tuesday evening, my sister-in-law called me back. She didn't waste time. She told me that over the past few days, she had been talking to her father, my father-in-law, and that he was devastated. She told me that he had recently discovered that money had been moved out of a registered joint account he shared with his wife. Not a small amount. The initial number she gave me was $60,000. She said more might be missing, but that the accountant was still reviewing. I sat down on the edge of the bed because my legs stopped working properly. She kept talking. She said her mother, my mother-in-law, had apparently been redirecting funds from that joint account into a separate account that my father-in-law didn't know existed. She said her mother had also, somehow, gotten her hands on documents related to the Kanata house and had been telling my husband that, if his name alone was on the title, the property would be protected from any potential legal exposure. If questions arose about the missing money, she had convinced him that removing me was a protective measure. For me. For the baby. I think about that moment a lot. The part where she had told my husband this was to protect me. I asked my sister-in-law if her brother knew about the money that was missing. She said she didn't think he knew the full picture. She thought their mother had told him a version of events that left out most of the actual details. I asked her if her father was going to do anything about it. She said, "He's the one who told me to call you." The Thursday appointment was at 10 in the morning. The notary's office was on Sparks Street, on the second floor of one of those older buildings with slow elevators and windows that rattle when the wind comes off the river. My husband and I arrived together. His mother was already in the waiting area when we got there. Nobody had told me she'd be coming. She smiled at me when we walked in. It was the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. The notary brought us into a small room with a round table and chairs. She laid out the documents and explained what each section covered. The language was very clean and very legal, and it said, in plain terms, that I was voluntarily transferring my ownership interest in the property. My husband sat beside me. His mother sat across from us, next to the notary, which struck me as odd. She wasn't a party to the transaction. She had no legal reason to be in that room. I didn't say anything yet. The notary pushed the signature page toward me and asked if I had any questions before signing. I said I had one. I looked at my mother-in-law. "I'd like to know why you're here." She said she was there for support. She said this was a stressful situation and she wanted to be there for her son. I asked my husband if he'd known she was coming. He nodded. He looked uncomfortable. I looked back down at the documents. My name printed clearly on a line above a signature space. One signature and the house would no longer be half mine. That's when the door opened. My father-in-law and my sister-in-law walked into the room together. The notary looked up immediately and started to say that this was a private appointment, but my father-in-law held up one hand. His voice was very steady. He said he apologized for the interruption and that he only needed 5 minutes, and that what he had to say was directly relevant to the documents on that table. My mother-in-law went very still. My husband said, "Dad, what is this?" My father-in-law didn't look at his wife right away. He looked at my husband first. His expression wasn't angry, exactly. It was something heavier than angry. It was the look of someone who had spent several sleepless nights arriving at a decision they couldn't take back. He said, "Before your wife signs anything, there are some things you need to hear. Both of you." He placed a folder on the table. Inside were bank statements, printed and organized, with certain entries highlighted in yellow. He explained, calmly and without raising his voice, that over the past 14 months, his wife had made a series of unauthorized transfers from their joint retirement account. He said the total, as confirmed by their financial advisor and a private accountant, was $73,000. He said the money had moved into an account that existed solely in her name, that he had not been informed of or agreed to, and that had been opened without his knowledge approximately 2 years ago. The room was very quiet, he continued. He said that his wife had told their son that removing me from the title of the Kanata property was a legal precaution, that it would protect the asset from any financial scrutiny that might follow. He said this was not true. He said the real reason was that his wife had, at some point, decided that if their son's marriage ended, a property held in his name alone would be easier to leverage. He didn't say for what exactly. He didn't need to. My husband's face had gone completely white. My mother-in-law pushed back her chair slightly. She said the documents didn't tell the full story. She said there were expenses he didn't know about, contributions she had made over the years that had never been acknowledged. Her voice was controlled, but her hands were not. My father-in-law finally looked at her. Just looked at her, without saying anything for a long moment. Then he said quietly, 40 years. That was all he said. My sister-in-law reached across the table and put her hand briefly on top of mine. The notary had stopped pretending this was a routine appointment. She said very professionally that, given the circumstances, she was not able to proceed with the signing today, and that she would need all parties to reschedule once any outstanding legal questions had been resolved. My mother-in-law stood up and left the room without speaking again. My husband didn't move for a long time after she left. I watched him sit there with his hands flat on the table, staring at the folder his father had placed in front of us, and I wanted to feel something simple, anger, or relief, or even just sadness. But what I actually felt was much more complicated than any of those things. I had loved this man for 6 years. I had chosen to build a life with him, to buy a house with him, to have a child with him. And for months, he had been carrying something enormous without telling me. He had let his mother shape his understanding of a situation she had created. He had brought me to a notary's office and asked me to sign away my share of our home. And he had not told me why. I didn't say any of that in the room. I wasn't ready to say it yet. My father-in-law gathered his documents back into the folder and said he was sorry. He said it to me directly, not to the room in general, and I believed that he meant it. Then he and my sister-in-law left, and my husband and I were alone with the empty chairs and the documents neither of us had signed. He started to say something. I told him I needed to go home. We drove back to Kanata without speaking. I sat in the passenger seat with my hand resting on my stomach, feeling the baby move the way she'd been moving for weeks. Steady, persistent, like she was reminding me she was still there. When we got home, I went upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed, and I cried for a long time. Not because of the money, or the documents, or even the house. I cried because I had spent months convincing myself I was imagining things. I had blamed his distance on work stress. I had blamed my anxiety about the pregnancy on hormones. I had trusted him with things that mattered, and he had kept the truth from me because... And this was the part I kept returning to. Because he had trusted his mother's version of events more than he had trusted me. He came upstairs after an hour. He sat on his side of the bed and he said, I didn't understand what she was actually doing. I said I knew. He said, that's not an excuse. I said I knew that too. He told me the full version then, or as much of it as he understood. Several months earlier, his mother had come to him with what she described as a complicated financial situation. She'd told him that some money had been moved between accounts to cover unexpected expenses. She'd been vague about what those expenses were, and that there was a possibility their family accountant might flag it during an annual review. She told him that if questions arose, the best way to protect the Kanata property was to simplify the ownership structure temporarily. She told him the whole thing would be resolved within a few months, and that I would never need to know about it. He had believed her. He'd believed her because she was his mother, and because she had phrased everything as protection. Protection for him, protection for me, protection for the baby. And he had shut me out because she had told him that involving me would only cause unnecessary stress during my pregnancy. I asked him, did you really think removing my name from our house was protecting me? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think I wanted to believe her because it was easier than the alternative." That was the most honest thing he had said to me in months. The weeks that followed were not easy. My father-in-law retained a lawyer and began formal proceedings related to the missing money. The amount eventually confirmed was just over $73,000. Retirement savings they had spent 30 years building together. My mother-in-law hired her own lawyer and contested the characterization, but the bank records were clear and documented, and the account she had opened was unambiguous. She did not contact me directly during this time. I did not contact her. My husband and I went to couples counseling, starting 3 weeks before our daughter was born. The therapist was a woman in her 50s who worked out of an office near the Rideau Center, and she was very good at not letting either of us hide behind comfortable explanations. There were sessions that were very hard. There were nights when I lay awake wondering whether the damage was something we could actually repair, or whether I was telling myself a story that made the situation easier to live inside. Our daughter arrived on a Tuesday in early November, a week before her due date. It was snowing lightly when we drove to the hospital. She was born just after 2 in the morning, 7 pounds and 4 ounces, and she had his nose and my stubbornness, which I decided was probably a reasonable combination. He held her in the delivery room, and I watched his face do something I hadn't seen it do in almost a year. He just looked completely open, no guards, no calculations. Just him. I didn't forgive him that night, exactly. That's not quite the right word for what happened. What happened was that I decided to stay, but on different terms. The terms were honest ones. No more carrying problems alone. No more accepting his mother's version of anything without telling me first. No contact with her for a period we both agreed to, with the understanding that any future contact would happen only with both of us present, and only when I felt ready. He agreed to every condition without negotiating. His mother pleaded no contest to a reduced charge several months later and repaid the full amount through a structured settlement negotiated between the two lawyers. My father-in-law did not reconcile with her. That was his decision, made quietly and without drama, and I respected it. My sister-in-law told me later that their mother had genuinely seemed to believe, right up until the bank statements were laid on that table, that she had acted within some acceptable boundary of family management. That she had been administering, not stealing. I don't know what to do with that exactly. I've spent time thinking about it. There are people who tell themselves a story about their own behavior until the story becomes the truth inside their own heads. I don't say that to excuse what she did. I say it because it helps me understand how someone could look me in the eye in that notary's office, knowing what she knew, and still smile. My father-in-law comes for dinner about once a month. He is gentle with our daughter in a way that makes me think he has been waiting his whole life to be this kind of grandfather. He doesn't talk about his wife. We don't ask. My sister-in-law was at the hospital the day after our daughter was born, carrying coffee and a bag of butter tarts from the bakery near her apartment. She stayed for 2 hours and made my husband laugh for the first time in what felt like a very long time. I'm not going to tell you that everything is perfect now. It isn't. Trust is something that has to be rebuilt in small, boring, daily increments. And some days I still feel the shadow of those months when I didn't know what was wrong, but couldn't convince myself that nothing was. Therapy helped. Honesty helped more. And there is something about watching the two of us figure out how to be parents together. Exhausted, uncertain, doing our best. That makes the larger question feel more answerable than it did. I think about that Tuesday morning on Spark Street sometimes, standing with a pen in my hand over documents that would have cost me something I couldn't have fully recovered. I think about how close I came to signing, simply because I was tired and scared, and had run out of reasons to keep asking questions. And I think about my father-in-law walking through that door, carrying a folder of bank statements, looking like someone who had finally decided that telling the truth mattered more than keeping the peace. He didn't save my marriage. The truth did. He just made sure the truth arrived before I signed my name on the wrong line.